On average, experts say that we think around 60,000 to 80,000 thoughts every single day. Have you ever stopped to wonder how many thoughts are actually hurting us and how many are truly helping us? Hi everyone, I'm Savanna and this is Mental Mondays with Savanna, a motivating, mental cleansing, and energy boosting podcast. I focus on how one can improve their mental health while helping you build a better mindset, better habits, and a better life for yourself. I'm a 15-year-old CEO, a passionate storyteller, and an optimistic dreamer who views the world through a different set of lenses. I came on here to share that unique view with you. My biggest hope is that my videos ignite a spark in you to seek your highest potential and so that you can live a life without limits. Let's dive into it. So today we are kicking off with how impactful our words can be, not only to other people, but to ourselves as well. I know we've been focusing on this topic a lot in the past couple of weeks, but it's truly important that we understand the significance of our words and how it can transform our lives. But before we start off, I want everyone to slow down and take a rain check. Take a rain check on how you're doing mentally, how you're doing physically, and slow down to comprehend these feelings. It's so important to stop and note how you're feeling throughout the day. But I know how easy it is to get so absorbed in your work or your school or whatever life throws at you. Nowadays, I'm really trying to be more conscious about myself to increase my self-awareness. And so instead of ignoring my emotions, I acknowledge and I understand them, or I try to understand them. Especially since we're often on the news or our social feeds, there's just such a huge wave of negativity that builds up into a mountain of all this gloom and despair that just weighs you down. But we need to learn how to put that aside for once, and even if it's just for 5-10 minutes, take a break from work or school and take a deep breath to process how you are feeling right now at this moment. Too often I found that people will go throughout the day with so many different events happening all at once without taking the time to focus on their own well-being. So if you need to pause this podcast for a bit to meditate and collect your thoughts and emotions, feel free to do so. By the way, this episode is largely built off of episode 10, how to stop feeling like you aren't good enough. So this episode 12, is kind of like a part 2 to episode 10. So if you haven't listened to episode 10 yet, I highly suggest that you watch it and then come back to this one. Now, let's begin with the topic of the day. The way you talk to yourself matters. How confidence is built. But in order to do that, let's first talk about self-talk. So what exactly is self-talk? Some people call it your inner critic, and others call it your conscience. But at the end of the day, it all leads to one idea, your self-talk. Now, self-talk is that inner voice, that internal dialogue or narrative that we hold about ourselves. And it encompasses all the things that you say about yourself and that you say about all the things around you. And even though we might not be aware of it all the time, our self-talk has a significant impact on the way that we view ourselves, the people around us, and just the world in general. Now, the problem is our brains tend to have a negativity bias, which means that our attention and our memory are automatically focused on negative things way more often than neutral or positive thoughts. We talked about this in the earlier episodes that we automatically think negatively whenever we are faced with any situation. That's the automatic defense that our brain goes into. because we're just hardwired to remember all of our negative experiences, maybe some things that we've done in the past that have embarrassed ourselves, and we just focus on all the negative things that we don't like about ourselves in contrast to the positive things. And the crazy thing is, it happens all the time. Like, for example, I'll give you an example by myself. Like, I'm taking a picture or I'm taking a selfie of myself. I am so quick to degrade how I look. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, I do not like this selfie. I'll just be so quick to judge myself. And it's a really bad tendency, or you could call it a bad habit that I have. Now, these examples could range from this little example that I just gave of me taking a picture of myself and me just hating it at the first moment I see it, or it could also range to an extreme example like self-bullying yourself and missing out on opportunities because you made yourself believe that you weren't good enough for it. So this all results in negative self-talk. We keep telling ourselves that we aren't good enough, we can't do anything right, or we're incapable and a failure. And we go back to the past and remember all the times when we made mistakes, we had unwanted behaviors, or we just had negative performances. And we tend to often replay these messages in our minds over and over and over again. And we keep experiencing these intense negative emotions. And then there's positive self talk. Now, positive self talk is the opposite of negative self talk, obviously, but it's often misunderstood. When we use positive self talk, we aren't lying or deceiving ourselves. We aren't denying the reality around us or our behaviors. And we aren't just complimenting and flattering ourselves without any basis for it. Instead, when we're using positive self-talk, and we need to learn to remember this, is that we are reframing how we perceive things and keeping our negativity bias under control, according to psychologist Roxana. So we show ourselves self-compassion and understanding for who we truly are and what we've been through and what we're facing right now. We remind ourselves that we are lifelong learners and we're still working on developing our skills and abilities. So when people think about positive self-talk, some people think that, oh, it's just boosting your ego, or no, you're just trying to lie to yourself that you're all this when you really aren't. But that's not what positive self-talk is. And that's not what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to change our mindset in what we're doing right now, any situations that we're facing, or any circumstances that we're in. That's what positive self-talk truly is. And I want to touch base on what Lisa M. Hayes once said. And she said, be careful about how you're talking to yourself because you are listening, end quote. And she couldn't be more correct. When you're looking for a job, maybe you're starting a new position, or you're working to get a promotion, or maybe you're just working to get good grades in a class that you don't think you're good enough in. It's a very vulnerable time. You're stressed out, maybe you're excited, very busy, and you're working very hard. But you know what are one of the keys to success? How you talk to yourself. The words that we use to speak to ourselves can have a huge impact on us. Now, if you're constantly putting yourself down, calling yourself names, and judging yourself, you'll eventually start to believe those things about yourself, even if they aren't true. Self-talk can have a very big impact on your success. So here are some tips for turning your self-talk around so that we can have positive self-talk. So the first tip is to be aware of what you're saying to yourself. The first step in transforming negative self-talk is self-awareness, becoming aware that you have this inner force within you, forming all your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. You might be surprised at just how often you put yourself down. The important piece of this step is to be non-judgmental. If you're already calling yourself dumb or saying that you'll never get the job or you'll never get that A in class, judging yourself further is the opposite of helpful. On average, experts say that we think around 60,000 to 80,000 thoughts every single day. Have you ever stopped to wonder how many of those thoughts are actually hurting us and how many are truly helping us? The second tip is that if you wouldn't say these hated things to your loved ones, like your friends, your families, even your neighbors, don't say it to yourself. Do you sometimes feel like you are your own worst critic and you often put yourself down? Are you too harsh, maybe authoritative, or even mean when you speak to yourself? Some of the negative things that we tell ourselves in our inner dialogues, we would never say to a loved one, to a stranger, even to your perceived enemy or your competitor. So, why are we protecting the ones around us and are willing to put so much care and effort into how we talk to them, but we aren't willing to do the same for ourselves? Do we not deserve the same level of care and effort? Yes, we do. We just need to be reminded of it. And this is what positive self talk and self compassion is all about. It implies talking to ourselves with kindness and understanding because we deserve it. This is not about boosting your ego or inflating your ego. It's actually truly caring about yourself and loving yourself because you do deserve this self love. And I know I talked a lot about this in episode 10, that I always had this inner critic that would tell me I was lazy or I just wasn't good enough. And I thought I was helping myself do better. But I was really just degrading myself and making myself feel even worse about my situation. So when you catch yourself saying negative or even cruel things about yourself, stop and ask. Would I say that to my parent, to my friends, maybe to my teacher? And if the answer is no, then you need to replace it with more compassionate and understanding sentence. That doesn't mean that you can't be constructive. You can still give constructive criticism to yourself. Make sure it's constructive and that it actually builds character and it's not mean to yourself. And the third tip is to stop labeling yourself. Now, I think this is one of the most important tips out of this list because we all do it time to time. Now you need to ask the question, is this really true about what I'm saying to and about myself right now? Am I really stupid because I didn't manage to understand something in that situation? Am I really incapable just because I made a simple mistake? Am I really unlovable just because someone didn't want to be in a relationship with me? Of course not. These are all labels that we attach to ourselves. Every time we ask these questions, we attach these labels to ourselves. So when we say we're incapable or unlovable, that means we only see ourselves through those lenses. And it comes with a sense of permanency. So we think it's permanent, like a constant that can't be changed. If I'm incapable, I will not believe that I'm capable of completing a similar task tomorrow or the next day. And those are the thoughts that revolve around our mind. Just because we have these thoughts, it simply does not make them true. Of course, we don't want to make mistakes or do negative actions, but we should examine our behaviors and see how we can improve them so in the future we have higher chances of performing in a way that we desire, not just dragging ourselves down and degrading ourselves. So even if you weren't able to do something right now, it doesn't mean that you cannot do it in general and that you won't be able to try again later or tomorrow. I always think of failure as stepping stones to success. Because failure, when you fail at something or when you fail in a specific circumstance, you always have the ability to learn, okay, what went wrong? What can I do next time? Can I tweak here and there? Don't immediately put yourself down. Say, okay, I'll pat myself on the back because I went through this and I didn't give up, even though I supposedly failed. But failure is just another stepping stone in disguise to greatness and to success. So actually ask the question, why did you make that mistake? Maybe you weren't paying attention. Maybe you didn't even have all the information you needed. Or maybe you're just running low on energy and you need more sleep. And what can you do to minimize the impact of these factors in the future? So remember to ask yourself these questions before just slapping a label on your character or on yourself. Now it's quote of the day time. So this week's episode's quote of the day comes from Robert T. Kiyoskai. And they once said, "It's not what we say out loud that determines our lives. It's what we whisper to ourselves that has the most power." End quote. So your words can either speak life or your words can speak death. Now, our tongues can build us up or they can tear us down and make your whole circumstance turn around just by your thoughts alone. We might not be able to fully control our circumstances, but we can control how we react to it. And as human beings, we often tend to switch to the negative side because of our natural tendencies and bias. But the advice I have to replace that with positive self-talk is 1, be aware of what you're saying to yourself. And being aware that you have this inner force within you forming your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. Also, 2, when criticizing yourself, think for a minute. When would I say this to my loved ones? If not, don't say it to yourself. Your brain may be tricking you into thinking that it's actually constructive criticism, but it's not. It's just degrading thoughts that tear at your self-esteem. And 3, stop labeling and defining yourself due to mistakes that you made in the past. Also, remember that supposed failures are disguised as stepping stones to success and greatness, but only if we learn from what went wrong and we apply that to the next try. Don't automatically think of yourself as a failure just because it didn't manage to work out the first time. Now, psychologist Roxana once said, "If what you're saying to yourself doesn't bring you any value and doesn't positively motivate you to improve your behaviors or your skills, then you're just submitting yourself to mental suffering by taking in the way that you do with yourself in that moment. The alternative would be to use a calm but clear way of speaking to ourselves in a reassuring way. Remember, your inner dialogues are meant to be constructive, supporting, and motivating. And don't you forget that." I hope that this inspired you to build up your confidence and remember that the way you talk to yourself matters in any situation. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. You just listened to Mental Mondays with Savanna. Make sure you click the subscribe button to receive more positivity every Monday and join the fam. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.